where every silence hides a secret. Here, we don't glorify crime, we unmask it. Each episode takes you deep into the minds of real gangsters, men who built empires on loyalty, fear, and fate, and lost it all the same way. From quiet dons to ruthless street legends, every story here is told with truth, tension, and the calm before the gunshot. So pour yourself a drink, dim the lights, and let's step back into the world where every whisper could be your last. They said he never slept, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't trust anyone long enough to close his eyes. It all began in a small town. The kind where everybody knew each other, but no one ever really knew the truth. Caylee grew up in the shadows of his own name, his past a collection of broken promises and half-remembered conversations. The kind of boy who would quietly listen in on grown-up talks, catching whispers of crime and fear, the unspoken rules of survival in a place where power was everything. As a child, he didn't talk much. He watched. Eyes sharp. Ears wide. It wasn't long before he learned that the quiet ones often held the loudest power. By the age of 16, he was already running small jobs for people who controlled the streets. A few dollars here, a favor there, always lurking in the background. His family? A distant thought. The streets became his true family, and in return, they shaped him, cold, calculating, and always a step ahead of anyone who thought they knew him. He would come to learn that nothing stays quiet forever. But that silence wouldn't last. It wasn't just the streets that made him, it was the bond between power and loyalty. It was the way you could never trust anyone fully, but still, you found yourself trusting. You had to. The only way to survive was to know who had your back. And in the beginning, Caylee wasn't sure who he could trust. He had a way with people. A quiet charm that made others believe he could be trusted, even when he was already planning his next move. A soft smile, a firm handshake, but always an eye that never fully gave away what was inside. His ambition? It was born out of necessity, not greed. He didn't want the world, he just wanted a piece of it that he could call his own. Growing up, Caylee learned about respect from his father, a man who spoke little but made sure everyone around him understood his silence. The older Caylee got, the more he realized his father's lessons weren't just about survival. They were about control, not just over people, but over everything. It was about power. And Caylee had inherited that desire, even if it had never been spoken aloud. It was a bloodline he couldn't escape. He understood now. It wasn't just about the streets. It was about understanding the game. The game, however, had a way of changing. The turning point came quietly, a whisper in a dark alley, a look exchanged in the corner of a smoky bar. Caylee was barely 21, but the weight of the street was already on his shoulders. He had a reputation, a shadow that followed him wherever he went. People started coming to him for help. And with each favor, the price grew higher. But he wasn't just climbing for power. He was building something. The word ambition never crossed his mind. It was more of a hunger, something deep in his chest that burned every time someone else got ahead. He wasn't content with small-time hustles and petty deals. He wanted something bigger, something that could change the game. He spent his nights learning. Watching older men who had carved out their own legacies in a city that never slept. Men who had no qualms about doing what needed to be done, even if it meant breaking the rules. They weren't monsters, they were survivors. And to survive, you had to be willing to sacrifice. Caylee began making moves, calculated, deliberate. He started gaining influence, getting in with the right people. Slowly, he built a network, a web of loyalty and power that stretched across the city. But as he rose, so did the tension. The higher you climbed, the more dangerous it became. The stakes were about to get much higher. Caylee had learned quickly that power wasn't just about the money or the territory. It was about the people who feared you and the people who respected you. There was a fine line between dominance and control, but Caylee knew how to balance both. He wasn't loud, but his presence commanded a room without a single word. It wasn't long before he found himself in the heart of the city's underworld, respected by everyone, feared by most. His operations ran like clockwork. Every deal, every handshake, every conversation had its place. People didn't dare cross him. Not because he was a tyrant, but because he had mastered the art of making people believe he was always 2 steps ahead. Respect is earned, not given, Caylee would often say, his voice low, measured. And with that, he earned the loyalty of those around him. He could feel the weight of it all, the respect, the power, the fear. It was intoxicating, but it was also fragile. One wrong move, and it all came crashing down. Still, he felt untouchable. He knew every move of his competitors, every weakness, every crack in the armor. In his world, he had control, a calm dominance that no one could question. But even the strongest walls have their cracks. The first sign of weakness came not from his enemies, but from within. It wasn't the law or the rival gangs that threatened Caylee's empire, it was the very people he trusted. His closest allies, the ones he had built this power with, were beginning to show cracks in their loyalty. They weren't the same as when they'd first started, hungry, ambitious, driven. Now, they were becoming too comfortable, too complacent. One night, in a dimly lit back room, Caylee overheard something that sent a chill down his spine. A conversation he wasn't meant to hear. 2 of his men, once his most loyal, were whispering about going behind his back. They were talking about a deal with a competitor, a dangerous game, one that could undo everything Caylee had worked for. The betrayal cut deep, not because of the deal itself, but because it came from those who had sworn allegiance to him. Those who had once said they'd follow him to the ends of the earth. Trust no one, he thought to himself. But in this world, that was easier said than done. In that moment, he realized something: loyalty wasn't a guarantee. It was a choice. And choices were easily swayed by fear, greed, or ambition. The walls were closing in. The shadows weren't just the ones lurking in the streets anymore. They had come inside, dressed in suits, wearing badges. The FBI. They were everywhere. Caylee could feel it, the slow, creeping pressure. The tension in the air every time he stepped outside. A simple glance could turn into a trap. A missed step, a wrong word, and it was all over. It started small. A few discreet questions here and there. A familiar face at a local diner, someone who wasn't supposed to be watching him. But soon, the surveillance became impossible to ignore. Every movement was watched, every phone call tapped, every deal scrutinized. Caylee knew he was being hunted, but the question was, how long could he keep his head above water? Trust no one, he kept telling himself. He couldn't even trust his own men anymore, paranoia had seeped into everything. Even the walls of his own hideout felt like they were closing in on him, and yet, he couldn't stop. He couldn't back down. Every meeting, every transaction, had to be flawless, no room for error. And when the FBI stepped closer, he found himself running blind, trusting only his instincts, moving in the dark, always a step ahead, or so he thought. But someone, somewhere, knew exactly where he was going. It was inevitable. The walls Caylee had so carefully built around himself began to crumble. The pressure from the FBI was mounting, his men were starting to lose faith, and his rivals were closing in for the kill. The betrayal within his ranks wasn't the only thing eating away at him. The quiet whispers of law enforcement were getting louder, and one slip-up was all it would take for everything to come crashing down. Then it happened. A routine meeting, a quick exchange, but someone had tipped off the feds. Caylee's heart raced as the familiar sound of sirens cut through the night. It wasn't supposed to end like this. He had always believed he could control the chaos, but now it was controlling him. There was no escape. Caylee watched as his empire unraveled in real time. The men who had once swore loyalty scattered. The familiar faces were now strangers, and the game he had played so well was now being played by others. The weight of it all, the choices, the lies, the manipulation, hit him like a freight train. He was out of time. In the distance, the first flash of police lights flickered through the blinds. And for the first time in years, Caylee didn't feel like the man in control. Time slowed in prison. The world outside moved on, but Caylee's world shrank to the size of his cell. No more power, no more deals, no more influence. Just the slow rhythm of the days passing, each one more indistinct than the last. The concrete walls pressed in, the cold steel bars keeping him confined to a life he had never prepared for. He had once been untouchable, the king of his world. Now, he was just another inmate. The streets he ruled were replaced by the unforgiving routine of prison life. But there was a certain clarity in this solitude. In the absence of noise, Caylee had room to think, to reflect on the choices he made, the empire he built, and the people who had fallen by the wayside. Every morning, as he sat on his bunk, he could hear the clatter of the cafeteria trays being set out. The sounds of men yelling in the yard. The chatter of prisoners talking through the walls. It was all the same: noise, chaos, and the desperate hunger for power. But in here, there was none of it. Just him, his thoughts, and the slow passage of time. "I'll survive this," he told himself every day. "Because I have to." It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about endurance. And deep down, he knew he could outlast this prison, the one outside and the one inside himself. Years passed, and the man who once moved through the world like a shadow had become something else, an older, quieter version of himself. His body had slowed, the fire of youth replaced by the wear of time. His face, once sharp and commanding, was now lined with the marks of regret. His power was gone, his empire scattered, but the weight of his past still clung to him. Caylee spent his days in the small prison yard, watching the young men who came in with the same hunger he had once had. They were full of ambition, full of hope. And yet, he could see the same flaws in them that had led him down this path, the same choices that could eventually destroy them. But he said nothing. What was the point? In the quiet of his cell, Caylee found something he hadn't known he was looking for: wisdom. The kind that comes not from books or lessons, but from surviving a life lived on the edge. He had learned the harsh truths about loyalty, about power, and about the price of ambition. His legacy? It wasn't about the men he controlled or the wealth he amassed. It was the lessons he could pass on, even in silence. And yet, as he looked out over the prison yard, he knew that for all he had gained, he had lost just as much. His legacy wasn't in the empire he built, it was in the emptiness he left behind. Years of silence, reflection, and regret had brought Caylee to this final moment. He had outlived the world he once built, not by luck, not by chance, but because he never broke his word. His past had a weight to it, a gravity that still pulled at him. But now, in the dim light of his cell, it no longer felt like a curse. It felt like a lesson. The streets had called him king, but they had forgotten the price of that title. His power had come with sacrifices he hadn't understood until it was too late. The men who had once surrounded him were ghosts, the empire a distant memory. But Caylee had made peace with it, not because he was proud of everything he'd done, but because he had finally understood the real cost of loyalty, of trust, and of the pursuit of power. It was never about who had the most. It was always about who could hold on the longest, and who could walk away when it was time. In the end, Caylee didn't regret his choices. He simply wished someone had told him, earlier, that there was more to life than winning. That there was a way to live without losing everything in the process. As the sun set outside his prison window, casting long shadows over the yard, he whispered to no one, "If I had it to do all over again, maybe I wouldn't have chased it so hard." And with that final thought, Caylee closed his eyes, ready to face the last of his journey, not with fear, but with quiet resolve. He outlived the world he built, not because he was lucky, but because he never broke his word. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gangster stories like this one.